Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, June the 22nd, 2021. I'm going to start today with a crime story from Toronto. This is from the CBC 3 days ago. 3 children were among a group of people shot in an outdoor birthday party for a 1-year-old child in Toronto's Rexdale neighborhood Saturday evening. Police said 4 victims with varying injuries were being taken to hospital via ambulance. It was a birthday party, a children's birthday party, said Duty Inspector Kelly Skinner of the Toronto Police. She said 3 of the victims were children, including a 1-year-old boy, a 5-year-old boy, and an 11-year-old boy. Earlier, paramedics said the individual children had life-threatening, serious, and minor injuries, but it wasn't immediately clear which injuries were suffered by which child. A 23-year-old man was also shot, Skinner said. Police said he suffered a leg wound. Skinner said the police are looking for multiple suspects, and they are appealing to anyone with information to come forward. So here's a follow-up story from the Canadian Press 2 days ago. Condemnation poured in on Sunday for a weekend shooting at a Northwest Toronto birthday party that injured 4 people, including 3 children, with politicians and police alike describing it as a, quote, senseless tragedy, unquote. Police said a 5-year-old girl was in serious life-threatening condition after the shooting the night before at a party for a 1-year-old boy who was grazed by a bullet. Toronto Police Superintendent Ron Taverner said the 5-year-old's condition was critical at one point. Police said officers were called to the scene in the Rexdale neighborhood shortly before 8 p.m. Saturday and were looking for multiple suspects. Taverner said he couldn't speculate on a motive, noting there are a number of theories out there. He said there were a number of shooters who fired on the group of people, and police were working on descriptions of the suspects. The police have the resources to solve this crime, and we will solve it, he added. An obviously horrific sort of events, Taverner said. I've been a police officer a number of years, and this is one of the most disturbing scenes when you see young people like this indiscriminately shot. It's disgusting. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called the incident inconceivable and beyond comprehension. The perpetrators must be found and brought to justice, he tweeted Sunday. If anyone has any information, please contact the Toronto Police Service or Crime Stoppers. Toronto Mayor John Tory said it was a shocking and outrageous act of gun violence that comes amid an overall decline in shootings in the city over the last year. Doug Ford said that it was inconceivable and beyond comprehension. This is the sort of incident that happens with great regularity in the United States of America. And now it is starting to happen in my own country. So the obvious question to ask would be why? Because demographically, Canada is becoming much more like the United States of America. What can we learn about Rexdale from Wikipedia? It's a neighborhood of Toronto located northwest of the Central Core in the former city of Etobicoke. And we find out that, of course, there's been an enormous change in Rexdale. Rexdale's first residents were mostly English and Scottish, but evolved into a multicultural neighborhood in the following decades, led by those from the Caribbean and the Indian subcontinent. Population of Rexdale, according to 2006 census, is 94,000 people. And Christopher Hume, in 2006, a journalist with the Toronto Star, wrote that Rexdale has become shorthand for suburban blight, social breakdown, and gang violence. In 2005 alone, 5 young men were shot dead in the area, a gray landscape of highways and high-rises, shopping malls, and churches. Hume wrote that children who lived in Rexdale had nothing to do and were wandering around the anonymous streets of the place. The vision of Rexdale's planners, Hume wrote, was a patchwork of separate precincts for working, living, shopping, and playing, connected by expressways. Joyce Lau of the South China Morning Post stated in 2015 that in Rexdale, other immigrants live in poverty, surrounded by crime. Note the passive language there. Apparently crime in Rexdale is a miasma that rises from the earth. There's a follow-up story from yesterday from the CBC again. Man arrested after Rexdale birthday party shooting that left girl 5 in critical condition. 24-year-old man has been arrested and has been identified as Demar Cadogan of Toronto. He has been charged with discharging a firearm with intent, along with 3 other charges related to possessing prohibited or regulated firearms without a license and registration certificate. Yes. What kind of people bring loaded weapons to children's birthday parties? What kind of people bring loaded weapons to children's baptisms? What kind of people bring loaded weapons to funerals or graduation ceremonies? We know exactly what kind of people do this, but we're not allowed to say so. Joe Warmington writes in the Toronto Sun, "Gutless cowards shooting at innocents is hardly new. Shocking birthday party shooting seems to be par for the course in violent Toronto." Again, why has this become par for the course in Toronto? Residents of a Toronto community housing complex on Tandridge Crescent are disgusted over the shooting that left 3 children and a man with gunshot wounds. They have had enough, said Councillor Michael Ford. The shooting prompted neighbors to demand a building resident leave immediately, blaming this person for having a connection to the alleged gunman. Toronto police are not publicly commenting on motive, although many area residents say the shooting was the result of a dispute over a woman. Ford said he and Tory were also on the receiving end of strong but constructive words. "We needed a bus here and councillors and someone to remove the children from the danger," said a resident. On Monday, residents say the heated exchanges were merely community venting, and most of the anger was directed toward the assailant and the person who responded, both allegedly using handguns. Residents find it revolting how anyone could target a toddler's outdoor birthday party. Well, look at places like Chicago, which is not that far from Toronto, and then ask yourself the question, why is Toronto becoming more and more like Chicago? "There was a code when I was involved in gangs, and this didn't follow it," said Marcel Wilson from One by One movement. Oh, he was one of the good gang bangers. Wilson, who said more investment is needed in the neighborhood, yep, more Gibbs, said the code was to never involve women and children. These alleged criminals seem to have, what do you mean alleged criminals? Seem to have no code or honor. Oh, yes, as opposed to all the other criminals who are just bursting with honor. There's nothing more brazen than children outside a gathering and this kind of violence happening, said Inspector Skinner. Witness Emma Lynn Redhead called it disgusting while telling reporters these gunmen have no respect. There was much shock at the scene Monday when the mother of the 1-year-old grazed by the bullet met with city officials on potential relocation to a hotel or another residence. Well, Toronto reels in horror, Warmington continues. This is hardly the first time we've seen this kind of gutless, senseless madness in Toronto. We are not even 6 months removed from the shooting of 14-year-old Alyssa Driscoll, just 8 months from when a stray bullet killed 12-year-old Dante Andriata Marroquin, 6 months since Hamdi Zachary was murdered while taking his newborn baby to a medical appointment, 13 months since rapper Houdini Jenkins was gunned down, and 17 months since the after-school killing of 15-year-old Safulia Khosrawi. Yes, and what do all those names have in common? Toronto can't pretend to be shocked and astonished. A gunfight would erupt around a bouncy castle, balloons, and birthday cake. Evil slayings of innocent people have become part of life here. Ask the families of Candace Rochelle Bob and unborn baby Kyrie, as well as many other innocent murder victims such as Vivi Leminas, Jane Kreba, Chantel Dunn, Brianna Davey, Cheyenne Charles, Joshua Yassay, Kisan Williams, St. Aubrey Rodney, Tyson Bailey, Jarvis Montague, Jordan Manners, and Ephraim Brown. And if you look at Wikipedia's list of prominent people from Rexdale, Ontario, they all seem to be rappers. But perhaps soon in the future, we needn't be bothered by troubling stories such as this. Paul Joseph Watson reports in Summit News, fact checker Pointer demands local news reduce coverage crime stories because it fuels, wait for it, systemic racism. It's a quote from Pointer. Local news reporters have amplified narratives that connect Black and brown communities to crime. As a result, we have fostered systemic racism through our crime coverage. Yes, as Steve Saylor would say, noticing things is racist. The Institute, which oversees the International Fact-Checking Network, which operates PolitiFact, put out a statement urging journalists to break the cycle of crime reporting. You see, if we stop reporting it, if we stop noticing it, then it doesn't exist anymore. According to Pointer, arrests for misdemeanors disproportionately affect people of color, disproportionately affect them. Again, it's like a miasma rising up from the ground. Systemic racism compounds the injustice, as reviews have shown that prosecutors are more likely to exclude Black jurors from trials. Why would that be? A jury nullification, perhaps? The crime in courts beat exists because it's constantly churning out stories. Yes, that's what newspapers used to be full of. Much of that content is directly related to public safety. Journalists can be smarter about who we cover and the follow-up stories we provide. Kelly McBride, who chairs the Craig Newmark Center for Ethics and Leadership at Pointer, said, local news reporters have amplified narratives that connect Black and brown communities to crime. As a result, we have fostered systemic racism through our crime coverage. It's within our power as journalists to break that cycle. We don't need to publicize the crime blotter simply because it fills airtime or generates clicks, or perhaps because people like to know what is happening in their city or in their neighborhood. For instance, which parts of the city should I avoid? Or which parts of the city should I avoid at all costs? The announcement was made at the same time that PolitiFact asserted that a claim the Austin American-Statesman deliberately omitted a mass shooting suspect's description because he was Black is false. However, the original report stated the reason for not including a description of the suspect was because it, quote, could be harmful in perpetuating stereotypes, meaning that PolitiFact is outright lying. With the addition of PolitiFact's false rating, which itself is false, the story will now receive less circulation on social media networks. Pointer President Neil Brown hates the fact people can still see what's really happening in our streets despite their massive censorship regime and their blacklists, writes Chris Menahan. Indeed, it appears as though Pointer thinks that by obfuscating the true perpetrators of violent crime, then it will cease to exist. The victims may have a different opinion. This also once again underscores how fact-checking organizations exist to censor information and hide narratives that are inconvenient for the establishment. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Prussian Junker, Dan, Palcaso 88, Con Tiki Roulette, Don Willis, Chokikin 666. Oh, wait a minute. Got a whole bunch of comments in there. Agurian, Gamian. Shocking how savage guns are, says Chokokin 666. Toronto has one of the most stringent gun control regimes in the Western world. And somehow certain people continue to manage to get a hold of guns. Remarkable, isn't it? Hello to Yo Mama and Dawn from Beyond. Palcaso 88 does not think much of the new Toronto. What? KMG misses Monday again. Pillows different. Drawer cracked open. Something on top of microwave. He's out of control, says Don. Willis. Well, yeah, there is something on top of the microwave. It's a box for my keyboard. See this here? Funny thing happened this morning. I couldn't find this mug. And I went over the table just to the left there, and this desk, which is covered with wires and machines, and every other flat surface in this hotel room, and I could not find it. And I was rather resigned to the fact that it had just disappeared somehow. And then I found it inside the microwave, where it had been sitting for 2 days. Have the cables moved, says Steve. No, they haven't. Yes, the cable stays. Last trip to Toronto in 2000, says David Wright. Hockey Hall of Fame and Pantages Theatre for musical. Doubt we could enjoy any visit there now. John S. says, KMG, I heard that the problem is they need more money for their programs. Yes, indeed. Kontiki Roulette says, all these people who are shocked and appalled are not very good at noticing patterns. Of course, you know, speaking of all of the tremendous rappers who have come out of Rexdale, Ontario, again, the people complain, that this is shocking and senseless, and yet Rexdale appears to be a community that graduates a lot of rappers who like to talk about guns, Glocks and the like, and putting a cap in people's asses and such like. Steve says, if only they could change that pesky narrative, they could solve all of these problems. There's magical thinking at work here, the idea that by changing the story, they can change reality. I don't know. Who says crime blotter anymore? Writer from the 40s. Yes, indeed. They did that in Sweden, censored the nationality stats. That's really working out well, says Kontiki Roulette. Inside microwave, beautiful, right where you left it. I know that feeling. I was thinking, had I perhaps, been awoken, as I often am, at 3 o'clock or 3:30 in the morning by lunatics screaming obscenities and 120 decibel music coming from pimp mobiles across the street, and I had decided, in a fit of fury to throw the cup at someone in the parking lot. I was seriously considering that because I thought, where else could it have gone? Oh, so of course, Canada has changed enormously since 1971, where according to the census of that year, there were 34,400 Black people in the entirety of this country. According to the most recent census, there were 1.3 million. And I don't know, we're going to get closer to, and the latest one this year, we're going to have how many? 1.7, 1.8 million, something like that. This is from Tristan Hopper at the National Post. 1/3 of Canadians believe they live in a racist country. But the same poll found that 85% of respondents thought racial diversity made Canada a better country. Well, we have a lot more drive-by shootings now. And we have, a lot more children's birthday parties exploding with gunfire and a lot more people being shot in schoolyards. So certainly life in Canada is a lot more exciting than it used to be. A majority of young women, big surprise, and NDP supporters, another big surprise, believe Canada is a racist country. While the notion is rejected out of hand by most baby boomers, conservatives and Quebecers, says the results of a new Angus Reid Institute poll finding massive fissures on Canadians' perceptions of racism. We are a vastly divided country depending on where we live, how old we are, and our gender, Angus Reid Institute President Scatchy Curl told the National Post. In many cases, these different groups are living on completely different planets. So if I understand this correctly, the world, and by that I mean the third world, is clamoring to get into Canada. We're going to have 1.2 million immigrants over that in the next 3 years, despite the fact that we're effectively bankrupt and the unemployment rate is, quite high. These people are what? 90% non-white? Something like that. So why are they coming here? Canada is a racist country. Wouldn't it just be better all around if we said, no, we're ending immigration entirely? Because it would be heartless and cruel of us to bring these non-white people into a country which is, well, racist. The poll found that 85% of Canadians believe that Canada's racial diversity made it a better country. How? How does it make it a better country? This is what Chomsky and Herman called manufacturing consent. A similar proportion, 82%, said that they didn't care if their neighbors were of a different race. I wonder if you asked that question on the streets of Rexdale, Ontario, what their response would be. I wonder what the people from the Indian subcontinent think about the people from the Caribbean. I'm guessing that there is little love lost between those two groups. The group most likely to declare Canada a racist country were young women. Of females in the 18 to 34 cohort, 54% declared Canada racist, far higher than the 33% of males in the same age group who shared the sentiment. Yes, and of course, racism or racist is not defined in this poll. As Ron Unz has pointed out, you just replace it, racism, white supremacy, with witchcraft, and it works just as well. Men over the age of 55, meanwhile, were most likely to object to the statement Canada is a racist country. A mere 21% of males born before the year 1966 backed the motion. Perspectives also varied widely among political parties. Of respondents who supported the NDP and the Green Party, more than half thought they lived in a racist country. Among Conservatives, that rate was only 18%. Oh, apparently in Saskatchewan, a notable 44% said they believed Canada was a racist country. I wonder how many people from Saskatchewan they actually interviewed. Small sample size, I would guess. Perhaps surprisingly, Indigenous Canadians were relatively sanguine about the extent and reach of Canadian racism. Only 36% of the poll's 127 Indigenous respondents saw Canada as racist, compared to 32% among Caucasians and 42% among visible minorities generally. Visible minorities are what in Canada, it's official designation, by the way. It means all non-white people who are not Native Indians. So we bring these people to our country and we give them affirmative action and all sorts of other advantages, and 42% of them think, nonetheless, that Canada is a racist country. Although Canada originated as a country with an extremely narrow ethnic makeup, boo! It has now become one of the most heterogeneous countries on earth, and that is a good thing. Why exactly? A 2013 study of Germany found Canada the most culturally diverse Western nation. Yeah! Pulling well ahead of the United States or any other single country in Europe. All the benefits of living in Lebanon, Yugoslavia, coming to Canada. Canada also ranks quite well for tolerance in one of the only surveys to regularly attempt to compare racist sentiments across countries. The World Values Survey asked citizens of countries all over the world what kinds of people they would not want as their neighbors. Fewer than 5% of Canadians answered people of a different race, compared to more than 20% in France and upwards of 40% in India and Jordan. These figures lead me to believe that the people in India and Jordan are far more likely to be telling the truth to pollsters than people in France, and especially Canada. In recent decades, heavy immigration has dramatically increased Canada's ethnic diversity. From 1996 to 2021, the country's proportion of visible minorities has doubled from 11.2% to 25.4%. Were the Canadian people asked whether they wanted this to happen? No, of course they weren't asked, because they would have said no. They would have said no. But we don't get a say in these things. Quite a lively, diverse, vibrant Juneteenth long weekend was had in our neighbor to the south. This is from our AWR Hawkins at Breitbart. 49 shot during Father's Day weekend in Mayor Beetlejuice's Chicago. 49 were shot, 5 fatally over Father's Day weekend in Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Chicago. Breitbart News noted 20 people were shot too fatally Friday into Saturday night alone in Chicago. Yeah, very vibrant indeed. But again, on the subject of things that we're not supposed to talk about, critical race theory, you all know it, you all love it, right? It's entirely necessary because white people are racist. They're white supremacists. They're responsible for all the evil in the world. Unfortunately, racism, and only white people can have racism, is incurable, which suggests a rather ugly end to this scenario. But now we're being told critical race theory. What are you talking about? Why would anyone make a fuss about critical race theory? Excuse me. Woke capital, that doesn't exist. Right-wing paranoia. Anyway, the stupidest woman on American TV has something to say about this. And this is from Lee Brown at the New York Post. MSNBC host Joy Reid has accused an outspoken opponent of critical race theory who challenged her to debate it on her show of making white man demands. Christopher Rufo, a senior fellow at the conservative think tank the Manhattan Institute, first accused the Readout host of dodging him as a guest in a tweet last Thursday, along with footage of her discussing him. Joyanne Reid has denounced me by name multiple times on her show, but she doesn't have the courage to invite me on as a guest. She knows that I will crush her critical race theory apologetics any day of the week, he tweeted. Using her Twitter handle, Joyanne Pro-Democracy Reid, the host replied Saturday by complaining that it was a weirdly aggressive way to get yourself on. Why not just contact my booking producers like a normal person rather than going with the white man demands option? Rufo noted that he wasn't demanding anything. I'm challenging you to a debate about critical race theory. The real question, are you going to accept this challenge or not? Others, meanwhile, accused Reid of hiding behind the protective mantle of racism by dismissing Rufo's request as white man demands. Her response also sparked a flood of followers demanding she invite Rufo onto her show soon. Don't be a coward, have him on, or stop throwing out insults. You know you can't hang, Billy Gribben tweeted her. I don't know what that last comment means. Mary McDonald Lewis told her it was disappointing to read a journalist of such clear bias. Oh, come on. That is surely concern trolling. What, Joyanne Reid? Biased? No. Her reputation is sterling. It's from Pam Key at Breitbart. MSNBC political analyst Cornell Belcher said Sunday on NBC's Meet the Press that the outrage parents are experiencing over critical race theory is not grassroots, but instead is organized and being paid for. By George Soros? Because he's responsible for all the grassroots organizing. On the left, PBS reporter Amna Nawaz said, specific to this idea of critical race theory, I spent time reporting on this county in Virginia, about an hour outside of Washington. To your point, this is something mobilizing people and resonating very deeply. It was about a 100-degree day. Dozens and dozens and dozens of parents, mostly white, in this largely affluent county, showed up to a school board meeting, 4 in the first one they attended, specifically because of this issue. Republican strategist Brad Todd said, you mentioned critical race theory a couple of times. This is a parent-led backlash at the grassroots level. Author Chuck Todd, he of the famous flesh-colored beard, said, it's manufactured, and then sort of the fire was lit. That's how pundits talk on TV. It's manufactured, and then sort of the fire was lit. Belcher said, it's coordinated, it's aggressive, it's intentional. What, white people fighting back? That's not supposed to happen. This is part of the tribalism play. Oh, tribalism's a bad thing now, is it? The critical race theory is, yes, Black Lives Matter, but don't all lives matter? Shut up. How dare you? Black Lives Matter. Yeah, no tribalism there. Critical race theory is another tool in the racial tribal boogeyman's toolbox to drive an inflamed tribalism, which Republicans think helps them in elections. This is Trump 2.0. It is a continuation of this. Critical race theory is an arcane ideal. Ooh, it's not only an ideal, it's an arcane ideal. No, it isn't. It is very, very practical. There are textbooks. Why is it front and center right now? The same reason Mitch McConnell attacked Stacey Abrams when she came out for the voting bill. It is racial. It is tribalism. We've seen it grow under Trump. This is part and parcel of it. They think this helps ignite their base. This is not grassroots. And Brad, you know this is organized and is being paid for. Oh, by whom? By whom? Name some names. And Ilhan Omar weighs in on this controversy. This is from Wendell Husbo at Breitbart. Representative Ilhan Omar denied Saturday that schools are teaching critical race theory. Republicans love to create outrage over things that aren't actually happening. People should be asking them what elementary, middle, and high school is teaching critical race theory, and why are they spinning false narratives? Nope, it's not happening. Not happening, people. Meanwhile, on June the 18th, Representative Glenn Grothman, Republican of Wisconsin, introduced legislation to ban the teaching of CRT in Washington, D.C. schools. How can we expect any child to succeed in life when we teach them that the deck is stacked against them and that they will be forever be held back by racist oppressors, Grothman said. Yes, the way that the right has approached this for decades is, can't everyone just get along? Come on, civic nationalism, people. You know it's the right thing. Whereas the left has increasingly taken the position, no, we can't get along because you people, white people, are devils. You're witches. You're the source of all evil on earth, and it is eradicable. Golly. Imagine fighting back against that. Libby Emmons with Post Millennial tweeted, NBC News is really upset that parents are fighting back against critical race theory. What's really happening is the grassroots civic action that has bolstered leftist causes for years is being taken up by conservatives. The left doesn't like it one bit. And there's a picture of Ashley the Lion, who is quite a fearsome looking woman and who definitely should not be wearing a unitard. Definitely not should be doing this. CRT aims to push two main premises. One, racism is ordinary, not aberrational. And two, our system of white over color ascendancy serves important purposes, both psychic and material. And who else is going to jump in? Oh, yes. One of our favorites. And a Canadian. Well, actually not a Canadian. He's actually from Africa. He's an Indian from Africa, but he is now translated to the United States. We have Nicole Hannah-Jones, GOP attacks on critical race theory in an attempt to suppress U.S. racist past. Yeah, there's just so much suppression of this racist past going on. New York Times writer and 1619 Project creator Nicole Hannah-Jones said Sunday on MSNBC's Velshi that parents' concerns over critical race theory were a Republican strategy to suppress the racist part of this country. Anchor Ali Velshi said it has evolved and become convoluted with critical race theory, and it's become the thing that Republicans are very, very determined that their children don't learn. Not because it's actually an interesting part of history, but because you are accused of having little white children hate themselves. Can you please correct the record for me? Again, if America is such a racist country, presumably even more racist than Canada, how come Ali Velshi is there spewing venom on the people who were gracious enough to allow him in? I don't even know what to say to that, says Hannah-Jones. Clearly, there's nothing in this project or in critical race theory that says anything about little white children and how little white children should feel. You're a liar. We have testimony after testimony of what is going on in schools now. And do we have any other heavyweights? Ooh, Al Sharpton. And he's got the Ryman thing going. This is from Trent Baker at Breitbart. Monday on MSNBC's Morning Joe, network host Al Sharpton, and I will remind you that this is a man who fomented 2 honest-to-God pogroms in New York City. And yet he's not only allowed on television, everyone rushes to kiss his boots. Sharpton addressed what he referred to as latte liberals, who he describes as liberals who are not aware of the progress being made in the Black community as they sit in the Hamptons and drink lattes. Yeah, why don't you piss all over your supporters, Al Sharpton? I guess you've got no fear that they're going to turn on you. Sharpton lamented that a particular group of liberals has taken advantage of the pain of Black people and people of the alphabet community rather than trying to ease their pain. Certainly, we shouldn't sit back and congratulate ourselves, but we should not condemn ourselves for the steps and the progress that has been made. And I think that one of the problems that we have, which is why I call them latte liberals, is we're having people assess what has happened, that they were not the ones that it was happening to. So if you're sitting around sipping lattes in the Hamptons, talking about what's going on in Harlem, you may not know the progress that we have made in terms of going from not being able to vote in my mother and father's generation to electing a Black president in my generation because you were never discriminated against. And I think that a lot of people have taken advantage of our pain rather than trying to ease our pain, whether it comes to race, whether it comes to gender, whether it comes to those in the alphabet people community. Yes, and they talk about white fragility. Too funny. Oh, strange things happening amongst the progressives that identity politics has proven to be just a step too far for a great many of them. Some progressives are fed up with it, and they are not suffering in silence. This is from Jonathan Cook's blog. What happened to Glenn Greenwald? Trump happened and put the left's priorities to the test. There's been a new public fracturing of the intellectual left, typified by an essay last week by Nathan Robinson, editor of the small independent socialist magazine Current Affairs, accusing Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi of bolstering the right's arguments. He is the more reasonable face of what seems to be a new industry arguing that Greenwald is a wolf in sheep's clothing, setting the right's agenda for it. Under the title, How to End Up Serving the Right, Robinson claims that Greenwald and Taibbi, once his intellectual heroes, are inadvertently or otherwise shoring up the right's positions and weakening the left. He accuses them of reckless indifference to the consequences of criticizing a liberal establishment and making common cause with the right's similar agenda. Both writers, argues Robinson, have ignored the fact that the right wields the greatest power in our societies. Do they really believe that? Do they really believe that? This appears to be a continuation of a fight Robinson picked last year with Crystal Ball. Yes, that's actually her name, and of course it's spelt with a K. The left-wing former co-host of a popular online politics show called The Rising. Robinson attacked her for sharing her platform with the conservative pundit Sagar Enjeti. Ball and Enjeti have since struck out on their own, recently launching a show called Breaking Points. What I liked about this argument that Jonathan Cook's makes is, again, just the fatuous illusion on the left. Oh, it's the right wing. The right wing's in charge. Oh, so the right wing, which controls all the businesses, has said, we're not having any of this Pride Month nonsense. We're not going to order everyone to grovel to Pride or to Juneteenth or to Black History Month or any of this other stuff. We don't have companies like Coca-Cola ordering people to be less white, etc., etc., etc. Oh, yes, post-traumatic Trump disorder. Robinson treats this as though it is irrelevant to his analysis of Greenwald and Taibbi, and yet it lies at the heart of the current tensions on the left. In its simplest terms, the split boils down to the question of how dangerous Trump really was and is, and what that means for the left in terms of his political responses. Unlike Robinson, I don't think it is helpful to personalize this. Instead, we should try to understand what's happened to left politics more generally in the Trump and post-Trump era. Parts of the left joined liberals in becoming fixated on Trump as a uniquely evil and dangerous presence in U.S. politics. Robinson notes that Trump posed an especial and immediate threat to our species' survival through his denial of climate change, and on those grounds alone said every effort had to be made to remove him. Others on the left recoil from this approach. They warn that by fixating on Trump, elements of the left have drifted into worryingly authoritarian ways of thinking, sometimes openly, more often implicitly, as a bulwark against the return of Trump or anyone like him. The apotheosis of such tendencies was the obsession, shared alike by liberals and some on the left, with Russiagate. The supposed scandal highlighted in stark fashion the extreme dangers of focusing on a single figure in Trump rather than addressing the wider corrupt political structures that produced him. It was not just the massive waste of time and energy that went into trying to prove the unprovable claims of Trump's collusion with the Kremlin, resources that would have been far better invested in addressing Trump's real crimes which are being committed out in the world. Well, yes, Russiagate. 2016 election was stolen, even though 4 years later we were told it's impossible to steal an American presidential election. Yes, Putin and Trump and Putin. Oh, so you're going to impeach him? Yes. There's nothing about Russia in here. It's all Ukraine. What happened there? And they don't have any answers. Oh, and yes, American greatness. You read stories like this and you think, you ask yourself, is this a conspiracy or is it just several things rising to the top at the same time? Bunch of stories from Breitbart, starting with Christina Wong. The United States Special Operations Command, SOCOM, confirmed it has reinstated its Chief of Diversity and Inclusion, Richard Torres Estrada, following an investigation into politically charged social media posts he made, including one that compared former President Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. SOCOM said in an email, Torres Estrada has resumed the duties of the Chief of Diversity and Inclusion for U.S. Special Operations Command after a USSOCOM directed investigation into the circumstances surrounding his hiring concluded and found no violations of law or DOD regulation. I would have thought that SOCOM would be looking exclusively for men who were good at killing people. But no, it's not good enough. You need more than that. Obviously, why did I ask that question? Obviously, this is coordinated. Christina Wong again, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Michael Gilday, would not say whether he thought capitalism was racist during a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing Tuesday. Senator Tom Cotton questioned Gilday about adding Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, on the recommended reading list for every sailor, and asked Gilday if he agreed with its primary assumptions, including that capitalism is racist. Cotton said, "You're saying as a senior leader of the Navy that you want 18-year-old sailors and 22-year-old ensigns to read a book that asserts that capitalism is essentially racist. Do you agree that capitalism is essentially racist?" Gilday responded, "Sir, with all due respect, I'm not going to engage without understanding the context of statements like that." Cotton said, "In what context could the claim that capitalism is essentially racist possibly be something with which you agree?" Gilday responded, "Sir, I'd have to go back to the book to take a look at that. I believe we can trust them to read books like that and draw reasonable conclusions. Why would they be reading books like that? How does that help them make better sailors?" No, but just keep on dodging the question. And here's the last of our trio from the same author. Army Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Rhodes, commander of the 1st Battalion, 8th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Regimental Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division at Fort Carson, is under preliminary inquiry after allegedly telling troops that white people are the problem. I should point out that Colonel Rhodes is a white man himself. The command is aware of an event involving one of our battalion commanders. We are conducting a preliminary inquiry to gather more information, a spokesperson told Breitbart. It would be inappropriate to provide any further details in order to protect the integrity of the inquiry. According to an eyewitness source, after soldiers in the battalion received a quarterly equal opportunity brief by an EO representative, Rhodes made additional remarks. He allegedly told soldiers that EO and SHARP, which is the Sexual Harassment Assault Response and Prevention, were very important to him, that he would take every accusation very seriously, and he believed there was only a 0.01% accusation rate. Again, does he really believe that? I don't think so. You'd have to be a fool to believe it. And, oh yes, progress. State Department to fly progress flag in honor of Pride Month. This is from Samuel Chamberlain at the New York Post. Secretary of State Antony Blinken revealed at an Atlantic Council event Monday that the department will fly the progress flag for the first time to mark Pride Month. Blinken described the flag, which incorporates a black, brown, light blue, pink, and white chevron into the traditional rainbow-colored pride flag, as a symbol that encompasses the diversity and intersectionality of alphabet people and communities around the world. Yes, this is a change since Mike Pence, who had said when it comes to the American flagpole and American embassies and capitals around the world, one American flag flies. And I'm looking at this monstrosity of a flag here, but you know it's only a matter of time. But people say, what about us? What about the asexuals? How come we're not represented? And all manner of groups. Is there, going to be a special color for the furries and the bronies? Well, I mean, there's no question what the Biden administration is promoting around the world at the force of arms, if need be, and that is pause. Someone in the chat, which I will return to now, was asking me last week, I think on Friday, about the concept of James Burnham's concept of Bonapartism, which I'll get to in just a minute. Berkin Sultanov says, where's Don Imus when one most needs him? Sharp training and similar mandatory training is a massive drain on time in the military, says Steve. Donald says, I make these sounds and swing my arms around, pick make-believe food out of the air. Am I racist? Is that wrong? Jokin666 says, capitalism is insidious and culturally destructive, but is evidently not racist. It's currently discarding whiteness. Steve says, China sailors are reading How to Sink an Aircraft Carrier Battle Group. Caligula, 138? Says, judging by what I see on TV, black people are all magical, sage-like geniuses. And of course, they have to, what's her name? Viola Davis? She says, have to work twice as hard to get half as much. Again, I'm sure she's memed herself into believing that. White men ended slavery, says Caligula 138. Needs to be said more often. It's my understanding that slavery existed legally in Saudi Arabia until 1960, I think it was. Of course, slavery exists again out in the open in Libya. Okay. What's up with Popeyes, KFC? Bojangles, churches get no respect. Okay. I like fried chicken. I don't make a fetish of it. I'm just thinking now, KFC. But let's talk about Bonapartism. And I believe I said on Friday that I believe that this is going to be the primary political mode of the future. You could argue that Putin is a Bonapartist leader. You could argue that the ruler of Hungary is a Bonapartist leader. I see a Bonapartist leader as a strong man, essentially. That if you look at Trump's presidency, even when he had both houses of Congress on his side, supposedly a majority on the Supreme Court, he was frustrated every step of the way. And what was it, starting in 2019 or 2020? Oh, the deep state. The deep state doesn't exist. Tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory. Oh, the deep state does exist. And they are American heroes because they're stopping that monster Trump in his tracks. Oh, Trump wants to know how many soldiers America has in various countries in the Orient. And the military won't tell him or lies to him. And no one is supposed to think that there's anything dangerous about that. And anyway, this is from Burnham's Machiavellians and his chapter on the political scientist Robert Michels. Psychological change is part of a larger process frequent in the development of democracy, the process of the growth of which Michels and others call Bonapartism, a name derived from the regimes of the two Bonapartes, particularly from that of Napoleon III. The despotic Bonapartist rule was not theoretically based, like most monarchies, upon any claims of God-given right or of inheritance. The theoretical and also the historical basis was democratic. Democratic form was carefully and consistently preserved. Both Napoleons ruled as democratic representatives of the governed, the people. Their democratically legitimate right to act as delegates of the people's will was confirmed in a series of broad plebiscites. The first Napoleon was overwhelmingly elected as consul for life, and then 1804 as emperor. The second twice as president, and finally 1852 as emperor. Michels wrote, Napoleon III did not merely recognize in popular sovereignty the source of his power, he further made that sovereignty the theoretical basis of all his practical activities. He made himself popular in France by declaring that he regarded himself as merely the executive organ of the collective will manifested in the elections, and that he was entirely at the disposition of that will, prepared in all things to accept its decisions. With great shrewdness, he continually repeated that he was no more than an instrument, the creature of the masses. The Bonapartist leader claims, with more than a show of justification, to be the most perfect embodiment of the will of the people. Everything, therefore, is permitted to him, since he is merely the symbol of the group as a whole. The intermediary political organs, parliaments, for example, still continue, but they are now subordinate to the Bonapartist leader, for only he completely expresses the popular will. They are his agents, and only through him are they agents of the people. Michels wrote, once elected, the chosen of the people can no longer be opposed in any way. He personifies the majority, and all resistance to his will is anti-democratic. The leader of such a democracy is irremovable, for the nation, having once spoken, cannot contradict itself. He is, moreover, infallible. It is reasonable and necessary that the adversaries of the government should be exterminated in the name of popular sovereignty, for the chosen of the people acts within his rights as representative of the collective will, established in his position by a spontaneous decision. It is the electors themselves, we are assured, who demand from the chosen of the people that he should use severe repressive measures, should employ force, should concentrate all authority in his own hands. Well, look at Joe Biden's administration. He is acting as a Bonapartist. His administration has taken the position that to oppose me is to commit treason. We have a former deputy leader of the FBI who's actually publicly suggesting arresting Republican leaders of Congress. The difficulty with the game that Joe Biden, or who's ever running his administration, is playing is that you are suggesting that the other side could do this too. Donald Trump went to great lengths not to appear as a dictator. Joe Biden isn't even bothering to keep up a pretense. Speaking of which, Burnham comments, all this is much more than mere pretense. Once granted the principle of representation, Bonapartism can be regarded, hang on just a second here, as the logical culmination of democracy. More than this, to judge from the experience not only of our own times, but that of the Greek city-states, the Roman Republic, and the medieval city-states, Bonapartism is likewise the normal, although not perhaps the invariable, historical culmination of democracy. Bonapartism, in one or another stage of development, is the most striking and typical political structure of our day. The great nations which, in the period since the Renaissance, adopted democratic political formulas and representative parliamentary practices, have, without exception in this century, exhibited a powerful tendency toward Bonapartism, a tendency which in Germany, Russia, and Italy has gone to full maturity, but which has also been plainly marked in, for example, England and the United States. It is a grave historical error, excuse me, to identify Bonapartism with other forms of despotism. Bonapartism, again, I'm sorry, is not merely military dictatorship. It is not the traditional hereditary or God-derived despotism of absolute monarchies. It is not the oligarchical rule of a closed hereditary caste. Mature Bonapartism is a popular, a democratic despotism founded on democratic doctrine, and at least in its initiation, committed to democratic forms. If Bonapartism, in fact, rather than in theory, denies democracy, it does so by bringing democracy to completion. Those who are constantly crying democracy, democracy, democracy have a problem. Because, well, particularly in the United States, because America was not founded as a democracy, it was founded as a republic. But the progressives, the people on the left, take the view that we always win. If we can't win through the ballot box, we will win through the courts by any means necessary, as a famous man said. Oh, so if the courts rule in favor of gay marriage, well, you see, this is justice. If the courts don't rule, but they happen to win an election, well, it is the voice of the people. All this clamoring for the voice of the people to be the voice of God invariably leads further toward Bonapartism. Because who are these people getting in the way? Especially, for instance, judges who simply make it up as they go along. So let's talk about the pandemic. Here's a story from The Guardian. World gained 5.2 million millionaires last year in COVID crisis. The system works. The global wealth gap widened during the COVID pandemic. This is from Kalgina Marketov, banking correspondent. Swelling the ranks of the world's millionaires by 5.2 million as the rich cashed in on surging stock at house prices. The figures detailed in the annual Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report capture how emergency interest rate cuts and government stimulus measures often benefit those least in need of state support, helping their assets grow in value despite the economic downturn. Dollar millionaires now account for more than 1% of the global population for the first time in history. The figures show that 56.1 million individuals has assets of more than $1 million in 2020. I've mentioned this fellow before. He's a YouTube channel. His name is Georg Schmidt. And he has an excellent video that came out in the last few days. Why is it that rich people pay so little income tax? Why are their companies not paying the income tax that or the corporate tax that they're not supposed to be paying? Well, because it's all in the rules. And one of the things these people do is they borrow money. They don't pay themselves high salaries, which can be taxed. No, they borrow money. And since we have ZERP now, this is just the best of all worlds. They get an enormous amount of money to spend as they wish and don't have to pay tax on it. And it is all completely legal. Oh, Dr. Fauci, is he still around? This is from Lee Brown of the New York Post. Dr. Anthony Fauci attempted to claw back his credibility amid criticism that he flip-flopped over the past year on messaging about coronavirus rules and mandates, including mask wearing, by claiming his decisions were based on a constantly changing science. Woo! Around COVID-19. It is essential as a scientist that you evolve your opinion, your recommendations based on the data as it evolves. The White House infectious disease expert told the podcast Sway that aired Monday. And that's the reason why I say people who then criticize me about that are actually criticizing science. He told Kara Swisher. Ooh, I bet he got some tough, biting questions from Kara Swisher. Of how he was attacked when he shifted position on mask wearing during the pandemic. The people who are giving the ad hominems are saying, Fauci misled us. First he said no masks, then he said mask. Well, let me give you a flash. That's the way science works. You work with the data that you have at the time, Fauci said in the interview. And what's the data that we have? about masks? You want to talk about the Danish study there, Dr. Fauci? No, I didn't think so. I didn't think so. Oh, another accidental act of censorship from Twitter. Here's a story from Jack Hadfield of the National File. Twitter suspends National File for report on viral Twitter thread about vaccine death. Tweets still on platform. National File had been locked out of its Twitter account for 12 hours and counting at the time the story was written. The official Twitter account for National File was suspended for 12 hours after the outlet dared to report on a viral tweet thread about the death of a teenager after taking the COVID vaccine. National File reported Monday morning on a thread from the aunt of a 13-year-old boy from Michigan who passed away only 3 days after receiving his second dose of the Pfizer brand COVID-19 vaccine. Preliminary autopsy results indicate that following his vaccination, the boy's heart has become enlarged and surrounded by fluid, a symptom similar to those documented in other teen boys who have experienced severe and potentially lethal side effects following their COVID vaccination. I'll get to Alex Berenson in a minute, but there's a tweet that he made that it really struck home with me, and it really brings us to the heart of the situation, a debate that we haven't had. When you look at lockdowns, masks, vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what are the gains and what are the benefits? And Berenson asked, let's see if I can bring this up here, that how far are we willing to go here so that people who are 85 years old with Alzheimer's are going to live a few more months, that people who are morbidly obese are not going to be forced to take any responsibility for their condition, and apparently, to suggest this is again to be guilty of racism, because apparently racialized people have been forced to become morbidly obese. And Peter Daszak is in the news again. He's had something of a setback. Let's see, this is from the Daily Mail. British doctor Peter Daszak, who tried to gag Wuhan lab leak theory, is fired from UN Commission investigating COVID after he was exposed for organizing letter denying leak claim in the Lancet Medical Journal. The British scientist profile on Commission website now shows him as recused. He is the president of the New York-based Eco Health Alliance, a medical nonprofit. Earlier this month, it emerged he'd organized a letter co-signed by scientists and published in prestigious medical journal The Lancet denouncing lab leak theory. Daszak did so despite having strong professional ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Chinese lab COVID may have leaked from. He has for years been a strong supporter of the work of the Wuhan laboratory. Anthony Fauci's institute gave grants to EcoHealth to support Wuhan work. Daszak's passionate defense of the Wuhan lab's work has raised eyebrows. He said the idea that COVID-19 could have escaped from the lab was conspiracy. Daszak insisted live bats were not kept at Wuhan, but now admits they may have been. And I'm just wondering, how long it is before Dr. Daszak, he just, embraces his destiny, that he starts to cackle evilly and declares, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Because that's what you think of when you think of Peter Daszak. Yeah, let's take deadly diseases and make them deadlier and more easily transmissible from animals to people. Because, of course, that's the sort of scientific work that any sane person would be doing. It's also the sort of thing, when caught out at it, you'd be rather sheepish. Maybe decide it was time to retire. But not our Dr. Daszak. sanity would appear to be returning to Canada, or at least part of it. It's a story from James Keller in the Globe and Mail. As Alberta moves to lift virtually all of its public health measures related to COVID-19, Premier Jason Kenney has responded to concerns about the speed of his reopening plan by pointing to something not included in the vaccine statistics: immunity among people who have recovered from the virus. The province plans to end restrictions on Canada Day, that's July the 1st, 2 weeks after reaching the threshold of 70% of people 12 and older with at least one dose of a vaccine. Alberta has among the lowest vaccination rates in the country, and when looking across the entire population, the rate is even lower, about 60%. But Kenney argues that focusing on those statistics misses a substantial portion of the population who have protection even without a vaccine because they have had the virus. He has complained that news coverage about the pandemic is neglected to focus on that fact. Sounds reasonable enough to me. However, experts are questioning those calculations and the decision to rely on them to guide the province's reopening plan. They argue it's not clear how long immunity lasts after someone has been infected and whether that immunity could be weaker against newer variants, and how many of them have also been vaccinated. Federal and provincial health officials have also recommended that people who have had COVID-19 still get vaccinated. You know, these viruses, they're not diseases like cancer, say. Someone shows symptoms of cancer, cancer is found, cancer is cut out with an operation, or cancer is reduced with various treatments, and of course it could come back completely in some other, same place or some other place. Viruses are not like that. Immunity is real. Are these experts seriously telling us that immunity no longer exists except if you get it from a vaccine? Let's catch up with William Briggs, statistician to the stars. And he's looking at this question of all-cause deaths. And it's rather strange. Why are the deaths so low? There are three immediate explanations. One, the CDC is even later than usual in counting all-cause deaths. Two, so many old people succumbed to COVID last year that there were fewer people left to die this year. This likely accounts for some of the weird discrepancy. Three, the CDC and everybody else is overestimating corona-doomed deaths. We're back to the early dying with and dying from controversy, juiced by the variant panic. This is the most likely explanation. I mentioned, yes, that scientists are admitting that, yeah, we considered the lab leak. Yeah, it seemed possible. So why didn't you say anything last year? Why did you deny it? Well, we didn't want people to think we were Trump supporters. This is true. This is true derangement. And here we see more derangement from Ottawa Public Health. You'll see the tentacles of white supremacy weaving their way through the COVID is a hoax. This is just a flu crowd. And yes, the see more replies section of this tweet will invariably be full of them, each one saying why their often racist remarks aren't racist. What? I thought this was a medical issue, but I guess it's not. Matt Taibbi tweeted, previously mentioned, I can't, per request, I'm unlocking this piece on the suppression of a debate, a certain debate about a certain treatment, which I am absolutely forbidden to mention on this show. So I'm not going to. Someone called Aimee Therese, who I believe I noticed before, she has an amusing tweet. New York libs are not doing so great. Picture of a young man wearing a mask. It's also a bit of a protest. Same young man wearing a mask. Well, I shouldn't be given the privilege to not wear a mask. A young woman wearing a mask. Not only have I been double vaccinated, I had COVID. Same young woman. So it's like a display of I still care. Yes, and it's the caring. It's the caring that makes all the difference when we're talking about fighting diseases. Jason Rantz on KTTH Radio had tweeted, a mask is required at all times for an outdoor market in Seattle. These people are insane. Why pretend they respect or even understand science? Just call them out, or we will never return to normal. Yes, here's a typical person. It gives you a great insight into their, how would we say it, Weltanschauung. Chris, it's getting to the point around here that I don't know what makes me look more like a psycho anti-vaxxer Republican asshole continuing to wear a mask or stopping. And that makes me anxious. I want people to know I'm a smart Democrat that believes in science. You would rather suffocate yourself. Yeah. PM Trudeau confirms the Canadian government is working on national certification of vaccination status for those who want to travel internationally. Well, I guess that's out for me then. Not that I was counting on it in any event. And, yes, in the It Never Ends file, this is from Victoria Friedman of Breitbart. UK may need more lockdowns this winter, claims senior medic and SAGE member. May have to do further lockdowns this winter, and England and Wales haven't even reached Freedom Day yet. Dr. Susan Hopkins told the BBC's Nick Robinson, "We need to move to a situation where we live with this. We may have to do further lockdowns this winter. I can't predict the future. It really depends on whether the hospitals start to become overwhelmed at some point." And when have the hospitals ever been overwhelmed? You know, quite frankly, just this talk of hospital, can't have the hospitals overwhelmed. Oh, why not? The hospitals are overwhelmed for a day or two. Wouldn't this be superior to locking down an entire country and eliminating the most basic freedoms? No, we wouldn't want to overwork those frontline heroes. Here's a fine piece from Roger Watson at The Conservative Woman. He begins, "I'm a Mass-going Roman Catholic, and I've tried to persevere during the COVID-19 restrictions, but the experience is so utter unpleasant, and as the obligation to attend Mass has been lifted pro tem, I attend only once a month." As Liz Hodgkinson wrote in yesterday's Conservative Woman, going to church has become a chore. Before entering, you must don a face mask, beep your test and trace, get doused in hand gel, and pick up a card to be completed at your pew with the number of your seat and a range of personal details. You are escorted to your pew and must sit where indicated. Once it is over, you must wait to be told when you may leave. And don't forget to drop off your completed card on the way out. I was less regimented when I served in the British Army. We are supposed to be grateful for the small mercy of being able to attend church at all and to practice our religion, but now I realize that I have adopted the wrong religion. Christian worship may be conducted only under strict and completely unnecessary restrictions. On the other hand, you may attend a heavy metal concert without restrictions, and this happened over the weekend at Castle Donington in Leicestershire. Pictures of rock concert goers crammed together, shouting and singing and making the sign of the horns, a satanic gesture of raising the index and little finger, make you wonder about the priorities of the present government and its team of medical meddlers. Tried organizing a church wedding recently? Again, you are following the wrong religion. In the Guardian article on the Heavy Metal Festival, there was a moving report of a couple for whom the event was a particularly special occasion. Apparently, Jamie and Lauren McAloon from Glasgow had a humanist wedding ceremony in front of the main stage. How sweet. It is hard not to conclude that our government are deliberately persecuting some sections of the population with one set of rules, while allowing others to operate under a separate set of rules. Enough has been said about the G7 summit in Cornwall, but the rank hypocrisy of the backslappers, handshakers, and huggers among the international leaders did not go unnoticed. I'm ever more convinced that the British government is waging a war on the British people and on core British values and institutions. Laura Dodsworth's excellent book, A State of Fear, published last month, provides ample examples of how this war is being waged at the psychological level. Confusing and contradictory messages issued by government and health officials maintain the state of fear, without which, for example, the vaccination campaign may falter. Is the tide turning? Having reported in these pages the loss of friends, relatives, and colleagues, and the opprobrium that I've received on social media, I now sense that support for the restrictions may be waning. People who were on message regarding COVID-19 months ago are now expressing frustration that we continue to have our freedoms curtailed. Many admit to flouting the regulations. An increasing number seem to have no idea what the regulations are, long ago having stopped listening to the government briefings. The people are beginning to see sense. We can only wait until the government catches up. And let's go to conservative skeptics. Sorry, lockdown skeptics. UEFA officials allowed to visit UK without quarantine. Yes, something to do with football, as they call it in that continent. Toby Young writes, a reader who wishes to remain anonymous has sent us this, an account of how they've been inspired by No More Mask declaration to follow suit. I applaud Toby's decision to stop wearing a mask from June the 21st, having made the same decision. I thought I would jot down some reflections on the wearing and non-wearing of masks in these irksome times. Perhaps more than anything else over the past 15 months, it has been the masks that have disheartened and dismayed me. The sight of hordes of mask-wearing COVID zombies shuffling around the high street on a bright sunny day is a scene of bleak dystopian misery. And I can only hope that future generations will regard evidence of this phenomenon with a combination of bewilderment and hilarity. Skeptics will be familiar with the arguments against masks. Yes, they're a superstitious comfort blanket for the terrified and a symbolic totem for the zealous virtue signalers. I suppose at this stage in the game, you either get it or you don't, so I'm not going to dwell on the case for the prosecution. You know, where I'm staying right now is on the block, the very same block as my provincial government's Ministry of Finance. So every day I see dozens of civil servants coming in and out of the building. And I've noticed that almost without exception, these people are wearing masks outdoors. Once again, Victoria is a very windy city. And even if, some droplet managed to escape from your mouth, it would quickly be sent away. But no, they must wear the masks. I suppose it makes them feel better, that they care. 4 Brits develop condition that can cause paralysis after taking AstraZeneca COVID vaccine. This is Guillain-Barré syndrome. Flu and pneumonia deaths now 10 times higher than COVID deaths in England and Wales. Travel firm TUI joins airlines suing the government over traffic light travel system. Big risk of inflation spiraling out of control as government borrows another £24 billion in May. Well, we've already seen from, what was his name, Benjamin Applebaum in the New York Times. Inflation, who cares? It's not a big deal. It wasn't even much of a big deal in the 70s and 80s. Or they just might take the tack that there's no inflation. What are you talking about? It's just conspiracy mongering. Talk about inflation. And should we have relied more on historical comparisons and less on epidemiological models? Golly, I will be so happy when I can go, a day or a week without hearing this word epidemiology or epidemiologist or epidemiological. And let's go back to Alex Berenson. And here we go. A lot of sad tales coming from the United States about young people dying from vaccine reactions. Of course, all vaccines cause reactions, even fatal reactions. But again, the question is this: what is the risk versus the reward for young people getting the vaccine, especially twice? We discovered from Lockdown Skeptics last week that I believe the number of people under 50 who have died of COVID-19 in Canada, a country of 38 million people is under 600. Yeah, that is quite a number. Can't make it up. Facebook is censoring the World Health Organization recommendation that people under 18 not be vaccinated. Well, I mean, they've got Fauci on their side, right? I mean, he's all about the evolving science. I don't think that the World Health Organization's science has evolved as quickly or certainly as perfectly as Dr. Fauci's has. Who rewrote their COVID vaccine recommendations after getting caught being honest? The World Health Organization did. Right before I pointed out the warning yesterday, left today. This kind of influence I don't want. Note that they still do not suggest vaccines for anyone under 18 at normal risk. And of course, that is an enormous concession to speak of, vaccines. We're talking about gene therapy here, something which is new in the mRNA jabs. Something new, which was given an emergency recommendation by the FDA. Rochelle Walensky, MD and MPH, who of course is the director of the Centers for Disease Control, who gave her first press conference a couple of months ago. She was pretty much crying and wailing about how scared she was. She tweets, decreases in COVID-19 cases, deaths, and hospitalizations show encouraging progress. However, this virus is an opportunist, as seen with the Delta variant. You mean like all other viruses? As long as there are people not vaccinated, COVID-19 remains a threat. Find a vaccine appointment near you. Are you still feeling impending doom, or have you switched to a lactose-free diet? Berenson said a couple of days ago that what we're seeing in the United States now with vaccines is it's like pushing on a string. That they've met the resistance, and there is a large number of people in the United States who have no intention of getting 2 vaccines or even 1. So let's bully them and bribe them. And I'll leave Hillel Belloc for tomorrow because we had James Burnham today. I wanted to talk about television as a psyop operation. And I started thinking about this over the weekend because Me TV, which used to be KVOS in Bellingham, Washington, which I grew up watching as a child, a very strange TV station because it was half Canadian and half American. Anyway, they have the old man's TV shows on now. And during the weekend, they have large blocks of idiotic shows like Gilligan's Island and The Brady Bunch. And I started thinking about television as a psyop with regard to The Brady Bunch. What is the message of The Brady Bunch? Blended families are beautiful. Of course, you later saw that with Full House a decade or 2 later. You notice what's odd about The Brady Bunch, apart from the fact that, Dad, Brady, his wife is seriously hot, and yet he seems very awkward around here. And then the penny drops, and then you remember that he died of AIDS. Okay, so we are missing a husband and wife because this is the second marriage for, the man and the woman. So 3 children from each previous relationship. What happened to, first mom, first dad? Were there divorces? That would have been kind of edgy to have 2 in one show in the early 1970s. 2 deaths? Did we have a widow and widower? Kind of gloomy, But this never gets mentioned on the show, and you don't have the situation, and I'm sure you've run into this yourself. You're talking to someone from a blended family, and you say, oh, I was talking to your mother or your father, and the person says, that's not my mother. Very offended. Oh, dear, sorry. I didn't mean to set you off. in this way. But I was thinking an even more successful psyop on television is the beloved Mary Tyler Moore Show, which ran from 1970 to 1977. I'll read from Wikipedia. Moore was an advocate for animal rights, vegetarianism, and diabetes prevention, with their two most prominent roles challenging gender stereotypes and norms. The New York Times said Moore's performances on the Mary Tyler Moore Show and Dick Van Dyke Show helped to find a new woman, a new vision of American womanhood. The Guardian said her outwardly bubbly personality and trademark broad, toothy smile disguised an inner fragility that appealed to an audience facing the new trials of modern-day existence. Okay. Before Mary Tyler Moore, women were married, and they typically had children. Or they might be spinsters, or they might be widows. Mary Tyler Moore goes out with a lot of different men on the show. And the conceit is that every man falls in love with Mary Richards. I'll get back to that later. So we learn watching this show, and of course I saw it at an impressionable age, is that it's clear that Mary Richards is not auditioning husbands. She's simply a woman who likes to have sex with a lot of different men, and which was just a revolutionary, shocking notion when this show began in 1970. There was a revolution in television at that time, and it was called the Rural Purge. I'll read from Wikipedia. This was a series of cancellations in the early 1970s of still popular rural-themed shows with demographically skewed audiences, the majority of which occurred at the end of the 1970 to 71 television season. In addition to rural-themed shows such as Mayberry RFD, the Beverly Hillbillies, and Green Acres, the cancellations ended several highly rated variety shows that had been on CBS since the beginning of television broadcasting. CBS saw a dramatic change in direction with the shift, moving away from shows with rural themes and toward more appeal to urban and suburban audiences. And there's a famous joke about this that Pat Buttram, who was one of the stars of Green Acres, said CBS canceled everything with a tree in it, including Lassie. That television turned on a dime in 1970, 1971. Suddenly it was all urban, and it was just overflowing with neurosis. All in the Family is a very good example of that. And of course, all of the Norman Lear shows were overflowing with neurosis. And we had Maude, the titular Maude. She actually had an abortion on the air. I don't think TV shows would dare to do that now, but that's what happened in the 1970s. So Mary Tyler Moore, Mary Richards, is supposed to be some sort of exemplar of the new womanhood. You might just make it after all. This is a woman who is clearly decided that she was 40 years old in real life when the show ended, and she was, past her prime, you know. But again, every man was in love with Mary. Why? Why would they be in love with Mary? Again, I have to admit that I was psyoped by this show. This is the sort of woman that I'm supposed to fall in love with. She was whiny and passive aggressive. She's always doing favors for people. She's always sighing heavily. Oh, Lou. Oh, Myrrh. And letting people know that, yes, I will do this, but I'm not going to let you forget for a moment just how much you are putting me out, to which my typical reaction is, well, then don't do it. Okay, I don't need favors from people if it's going to make me feel miserable or as if I'm exploiting someone. But let's compare Mary on this show to the other women. So her best friend, Rhoda. Well, Rhoda is this frumpy woman who's a big joke. Is she? I thought she was more attractive than Mary Richards on the show. If you ask a group of men, after a hard day's graft, who would you rather come home to? Mary or Rhoda? And I remember James Wolcott of Vanity Fair once wrote, you think of these old shows, these classics, and how slow they were. You have a 7-minute segment, and okay, so Rhoda has a new boyfriend. Oh man, this is going to be hilarious. This guy's going to be a loser, just like her. So after 7 minutes, you find out, oh, Rhoda doesn't want to say, but it turns out her boyfriend's a tree surgeon. That's the joke. Yeah. What's wrong with being a tree surgeon? So we have Phyllis. Oh, she's wacky and zany and pretentious or whatever. Well, Cloris Leachman, also a far more attractive woman than Mary Tyler Moore. Now, Phyllis was a stay-at-home mother with a child, so she's going to have to suffer. Yep. It turns out her husband, Lars, is cheating on her with, Sue Ann Nivens, the happy homemaker. Ho, 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 ho. And then I remember one episode where Phyllis's child, Mary looks after her for a day for some reason, not important. And there's a kind of conspiracy between them, between Mary Richards and Phyllis's child, that we're going to agree what a ridiculous woman, my mother is. Yeah, but you don't have any children. You're looking after a child for one day. She has a responsibility for that child all the time. You see that Mary Richards was the original cool wine aunt. Then you just know how she would end up in real life. Dead, alone in her apartment, being eaten by her cat. But no, everyone loved Mary. And it's just so, Murray Slaughter, Gavin MacLeod, right? So, he's just utterly besotted, romantically, sexually, with Mary Richards. And then you find out that his wife in the show is an actress called Joyce Bulifant, who was an absolute knockout. A bubbly, busty blonde. But no, for some reason, he prefers whiny Mary Richards. And I don't know, there's a sentimentality about this show that it hasn't aged well. Most of the people on these shows are jerks, or just unpleasant people, but we're told that they're actually lovable. Well, no, they're not lovable, especially Ted Baxter, who was a very nasty person indeed, also completely incompetent. And keep in mind that he's hosting the flagship news program of a CBS affiliate in a major market, Minneapolis. But no, TV has been, you go back to TV from the 1950s, even Westerns, and it is really kind of shocking how liberal they are. Jazz Jennings is a TV star, or is going to be a TV star again, and these things have not gone well for Jazz Jennings. I won't go into the details of the many surgeries because they're vomit-inducing. But this is a story Warner Todd Houston for Breitbart. Transgender activist and reality TV star Jazz Jennings posted an Instagram message admitting to having a binge eating disorder and undergoing a rapid 100-pound weight gain. Yes, posted pictures of this, wearing a bikini and short shorts. No. In the post, the I Am Jazz star admitted to having a problem with eating over the last year or so. She posted side by side before and after pictures. I'm posting this photo because it's time for me to address my weight gain and hold myself accountable. I'm ready to change my ways. So it's publicity for the show, 7th season of I Am Jazz, which taught us just how wonderful a male-to-female transsexuality is. In the same way that RuPaul's Drag Race taught us, or women at any rate, just how wonderful drag queens are. In the same way that shows that Will and Grace taught us, well, women, that homosexuals are our superiors. They're just so handsome and attractive and intelligent and witty. and the like. I'm going to be moving to Music Monday in just a minute. But here's some good news. I suppose there's a limit to how far audiences can be memed. This is from MediaMole.co.uk. Channel 5's three-part drama Anne Boleyn limped to its conclusion with just 449,000 viewers. That's 3.2% in the 9 p.m. hour last night, according to early ratings figures. The show stars Black actress Jodie Turner-Smith as Henry VIII's doomed second wife in an alternative account of the final few months of her life. On paper, Anne Boleyn looked like a surefire hit, as Channel 5 has a track record of rating success with both royal-themed programming and original dramas, but last night's final episode suffered the indignity of being beaten by a repeat of Vera. Thursday's most-watched program of the day on any channel was ITV's 9 p.m. episode of Coronation Street, which was seen by 4.2 million people, or 28.7% of the audience. Yes, PSYOP? Oh, Britain's black. It's always been black. It has? Oh, going back to the Middle Ages. Oh, going back to the days of King Arthur and the Vikings. It was black then. If you keep showing it, then I guess enough people will believe it. And that is what has been happening. So I want to talk about a German composer whose name was Berthold Goldschmidt, who suffered a great many reverses in his life. He was never a bitter man, but I like this story because it has a happy ending. And we all like happy endings, don't we? I know I do. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Goldschmidt lived from 1903 to 1996. He was very successful, indeed, from an early age. One of his popular works is Passacaglia, which is Opus 4. He won the Mendelssohn Prize, and he had a spectacular opening of his first opera, Gewalt Hanrei, rather similar to Erich Korngold, actually. But then the Nazis came to power, and he wisely fled after his work was called degenerate music. So he went to England in 1935, and he found that he was dubbed useful by the BBC because he was a German musician. And so he could be employed in propaganda efforts. And he continued to write, including his acclaimed opera, Beatrice Cenci, which is based on Shelley, a piece. But Goldschmidt had a big problem, was that Goldschmidt was not modern enough. Covent Garden wouldn't put on his award-winning opera. And the director of music at the BBC, Sir William Glock, had him on a list of banned composers. Others on the list included Arnold Bax, Aaron Copland, Edmund Rubra, and Karol Szymanowski. That apparently Goldschmidt's music was too tuneful, too diatonic, not forward-looking enough. I'll explain to you what happened. That there was a man, a member of the New Vienna School, called Anton von Webern, and he was an acolyte of Arnold Schoenberg, who invented the 12-tone system. Webern was not a very productive composer. The original complete version of his works, conducted by Pierre Boulez on what CBS Records was 3 CDs. 3 CDs. Later, Deutsche Grammophon managed to cobble together a survey which included everything that was in any way associated with Webern, and they managed to make it more than 3 CDs. Webern, of course, was a friend and collaborator with one of Schoenberg's other students or mentees, Alban Berg. Berg died at the age of 49 or 50, I think in 1935. Webern was shot to death by a drunken American soldier in 1945 in Vienna, and he became a martyr figure. And for decades following his death, music had to be like Webern's, that you couldn't do it differently because it was a kind of heresy to do it differently. I'm reminded. I should mention that the Frankfurt School has a huge role in this, because they made their demands that music must be always forward-looking. That Richard Strauss, who had been a great modernist hero, became regarded as a traitor because his music was headed in a certain direction, and he decided to stop, and that he wanted to continue to write music that people liked. But of course, my favorite example of this is a member of the Frankfurt School named René Leibowitz, who was a conductor and a composer. For some reason, there were 2 box sets of music in my house growing up, and one of them was a best bits of classical collection. These came from Reader's Digest. Millions of people had them in their houses. And the other one was the complete symphonies of Beethoven, for some reason conducted by René Leibowitz. Anyway, Leibowitz famously wrote a pamphlet called Sibelius, the worst composer in the world. Sibelius's music was extraordinarily popular in the 1930s. And he was the most popular living composer in the world. But again, his music was certainly a development, but it was not radical enough for the serialists and those who came after them. So he was actively hated. Since the 1960s, again, Sibelius has become, one of the most popular composers of the last 100 years or so. But poor Berthold Goldschmidt, he suffered this disdain or hatred because he wanted to write music that people liked. Now, if you look at this, what is still called to this day new music, you'll still hear some diehards saying, "Oh, you have to give new music a chance." Well, how far do you want to go back when you're talking about new music? More than 100 years? The academicians took over after 1945, although, Sibelius lived till 1957, and there was Stravinsky, but even, Stravinsky and Aaron Copland were bullied into writing 12-tone serialist pieces. It's just remarkable. You look at someone like Pierre Boulez. Does anyone listen to his music? Does anyone ever listen to his music? There was a belief that, there was a wall of ignorance or prejudice separating this new music, from the popular acclaim, which it deserved, and that the wall would be smashed. Well, that never happened. Let's see, Boulez, no. Luciano Aberio, no. Maurizio Kagel, no. Yanis Xenakis, no. Stockhausen, a very strange person, I find some of his pieces, particularly his early pieces, to be quite engaging. But if you look back at the 1960s and 1970s and you realize what a guru figure he was then compared to his reputation now, well, that's not the way that things were supposed to go. I'm going to read to you from a column by Norman Lebrecht. Just give me a moment here. Here we go. Sorry, it's here somewhere. It is here somewhere. Here we go. Here we go. This is a piece that he wrote in 2003. The memory that never fades was an old man on his doorstep clutching a compact disc. I'd gone round to Berthold's for coffee, cake, and musical research. He was at 87 an infallible repository of inside information about Berlin culture between the wars. He was also unfailing good company and a brilliant mimic. When discussing the history of conducting, he would show me not just how early masters Nickisch, Kleiber, Klemperer, Walter Furtwängler held their batons, but how they ate spaghetti, how they flirted and walked, how they cracked a joke. On this spring day, he greeted me with ill-contained excitement. "What's that?" I asked. "My first recording," he glowed. After a lifetime of neglect, some of his chamber music had been etched in permanence on an esoteric label. We went indoors to listen to the sinewy, cross-rhythmic second-string quartet, in my view, the finest piece of music written anywhere in the world, in 1936. Berthold Goldschmidt had composed it on arrival in England as a refugee from Hitler's Reich, but it was written neither in rage nor in retrospect. It looked instead ahead to a new life, a life that for various reasons would be stunted by obstacles of British prejudice and incomprehension. More than half a century later, he was still living in the one-bedroom flat on Belsize Crescent that he had rented on arrival. Hot water had only recently been installed. Oddly, he was not bitter. Bitterness, he said wryly, is a matter of taste. Neither of us, Lebrecht continues, could have foreseen the fame that was about to break. A chain of events arising from an 80th birthday run-through of his 1932 opera, The Magnificent Cuckold, at Trinity College of Music, had found him a publisher at Boosey at Hawkes and a flickering of interest abroad. He resumed composing after a 25-year silence. Simon Rattle, who revered Berthold as a mentor, conducted a Symphonica in Berlin. The Decca record company, flush with 3 tenors profits, set out to record his entire life's work as a cornerstone of its Entarta Musik project, restoring music by composers suppressed by the Nazis and since forgotten. Berthold, reaching 90, was suddenly hot stuff. Berlin, which had booked the Cuckold for 1933, finally got around to staging it 61 years later. The recording sold 2,000 copies in a month in Spain. The BBC Proms made belated reparation. Yo-Yo Ma played his cello concerto in New York. Berthold whizzed around Europe, taking his bows with a quizzical smile. "I only wish some of my enemies were alive to enjoy this," he murmured. He abhorred empty praise. When we sat in his living room, scores on laps, listening to a test pressing of his music, he would shush my excited first response and play the disc again, awaiting a more balanced criticism. A fanatical accurist, he would heatedly berate me for a tiny elision of historical detail in a film I had helped make or an article I had written. Truth for Berthold was a value that could not be compromised. It was, I gathered, a Malarian legacy he had acquired while growing up in Hamburg in a fairly comfortable family that owned a furniture store. His father claimed to have attended all of Mahler's concerts and opera productions between 1892 and 1897, performances that were marked by a fervent fidelity. Berthold, aged 8, remembered the darkness that descended when an uncle announced Mahler's death in May 1911. After the First World War, he studied in Berlin with Franz Schrecker, whose conservatory class was a crucible of modernism. He won the Mendelssohn Prize at 22 with Passacaglia and had Erich Kleiber and Otto Klemperer scrapping for the right to conduct the premiere. When the Cuckold was staged at Mannheim in February 1932, he was hailed by one critic as the white hope of German music. 11 months later, Hitler came to power. Goldschmidt, a progressive and a Jew, was sacked from his backstage job at the Berlin State Opera, and his music was banned. He emigrated 2 years later at the urging of a musicianly Gestapo officer. In England, he encountered blank walls of indifference. His string quartet received its only performance for 14 years in the drawing room of a Harley Street physician. He scraped up bits of work from the Ballets Josse and during the Second World War, the BBC. He won a national competition to write an opera for the 1951 Festival of Britain, but Covent Garden refused to stage it for being too un-English. The composer's letter of protest to the Times earned him powerful enemies. When William Glock imposed an atonalist writ on the BBC in 1959, Goldschmidt a relentless melodist, saw his last outlet closed and stopped composing. Consider now what damage was done by that bureaucratic rejection of a talented, willing, and conscientious artist. Set aside the injustice to the man himself, the privations enforced, the hopes that were crushed. For such things there is no amend. And yes, Decca went rather spare with Goldschmidt, producing whatever they could find, and bringing in top singers, composers, orchestras. What does he sound like? I suppose you could, he'd worked with Alban Berg, so you can see something of a similarity there. I was listening to the Shelley opera, and I seem to find resemblances between that and Francis Poulenc in his writing for voice. I suppose you could start the record that came out in 1996 called the Goldschmidt album. And we have a concertos record with star soloists Chantal Juliette, Sabine Meyer, and Yo-Yo Ma. And again, as mentioned previously, Simon Rattle is a great champion of his music. Well, talent will out, as they say, and it pleases me no end to see that Goldschmidt is now far more popular than any of the mediocrities who were vaulted past him. So let's go to the chat. Chad Chadson, thank you to our valiant moderator for your service. Portland is getting bad. Cops are simply not responding to calls. Didn't the whole 50 members of the riot squad quit en masse last week? Klemperer, father of Colonel Klink. Yes. Klemperer was a wild man. He had a brain tumor which required an operation to remove a part of his brain, and he was quite unstable after that. He burned all his bridges. It was Walter Legg who rescued his career when he signed him to EMI, where he made these great records of the 50s and 60s. Here's a famous story about Klemperer that is told about him. The memoirs by Elizabeth Schwarzkopf, the great soprano who was Walter Legg's wife. That Klemperer was a Jew who had converted to Catholicism, and he later converted back. Shortly after the Second World War ended, he was visiting a sister who lived in Israel, and he happened to run into the manager of what was then called the Palestine Philharmonic Orchestra. And Klemperer said to this man, "I am a great Jewish artist, and yet you have never invited me to conduct your orchestra." And the manager said, "Well, you are a convert, so to us you are a heretic." And Klemperer said, "Dr. Kusevitsky is also a heretic, but he has been invited to conduct your orchestra." And the manager said, "Dr. Kusevitsky agreed to conduct without a fee." And Klemperer said, "I'm still Jewish enough not to agree to that." And now, New York City hates Giuliani? It says Ragentooth owns Hogwood. Yeah. I don't know. A lot of people say that Klemperer's stuff is too slow. It's very unfashionable now because of its grandeur and stolidity. And KMG, to what extent does the radicalism of the serial composers reflect a political radicalism? Schoenberg wasn't a political radical. He was a conservative. So was Alban Berg. But Alban Berg was only partially a serialist. He used tone rows and the like. I just see it as an arid imposition of the academy. These people, they all have their jobs at universities. They don't have to write music that anybody likes. And when I used to go to the symphony, just the number of, my own personal take on the 12-tone system. Oh, God, not again. Not again. But it's all been swept away. Okay, let's see. Andrew Yang is getting crushed, Says what is this? Raganuth? The cops only quit the SWAT unit. They still work for the Portland PD. It was just overtime for them. Andrew Yang got in trouble because he made the controversial statement that that lunatics, homeless lunatics that go around attacking people, punching them, stabbing them, throwing in front of subway trains, need to be put away. How very mean of him. Okay, so that is the show for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. Coming up on the show later this week, on Thursday, I'm going to be discussing the Japanese classic by Kenji Mizoguchi, Ugetsu, and a very exciting book, a World War II, a memoir of danger and daring do by Peter Kemp called No Colors or Crest. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, exceedingly well appreciated at this time for me. Thank you so much to those who have done so already. You mean the world to me. I honestly mean that. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations to the live stream may be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.